So it took me a long time, and I had several people really work with me to be able to eloquently put my non-nerdy ideas into a format that everybody understood.
So what did they teach you?
It was whiteboarding, honestly. I had a really good mentor who sat me down one day and said, Stephanie, you're absolutely brilliant. You know what you're talking about, but I can't understand a word that comes out of your mouth.
Really?
Yeah. He was brutally honest, and it really helped. It really made a big difference. So he said, I'm going to try explaining this to me again like I was 5.
Okay, that's a good one.
And it really did help. It made a huge difference. And I wound up getting frustrated during that conversation. And I understood where he was coming from. But it was one of those situations where I was like, why don't you understand it? And it finally clicked that day that he doesn't understand all of the technology terms and he doesn't understand the implications behind them. So he worked with me, and I started drawing it out on the whiteboard in 5-year-old language. And he goes, the phrase that I remember, and it always stuck with me, is you're teaching string theory to a 4-year-old.
String theory to a 4-year-old. I love that.
Ultimately, at the end of the day, my job is not to solve every single problem. My job is to ask very pointed questions and make sure that everybody in the room is coming up with an answer together, regardless of what level they're at.
How about if you're someone like yourself who probably already knows the answer, and you're in a group of folks that are your team? How do you restrain yourself?
So those are the most fun. Those are honestly the most fun conversations. I will usually pull a brand new team into a conference room. And so it usually takes me about a week to understand the general architecture and the systems and how they integrate and where the data goes and everything else. So I'll start out and I'll draw out my diagram for whatever project it is with all of the servers out on the board and using multicolors. And then I will sit down and I'll go, okay, guys, is this how this works? And sometimes they'll get up and they'll say, no, this one goes over here. This one goes over there. The data doesn't flow that way, blah, blah, blah. Fine. No big deal. I don't expect it to be 100% perfect. That's not the object of the exercise. So then from there, I'll say, okay, let's say you're starting brand new. Today is your first day. You've never met me. I've never met you. What would you do in this scenario if you walked into this? Is this how you would have architected things? If you had your druthers and you could do anything you wanted to, how would you have architected this? And usually there's a silence for about 4 or 5 minutes while they sit there and look at me like, is she serious? Does she really know what she's doing? And I said, really, guys, go for it, because it's mostly guys. So I said, go for it. I'm just here. You do your thing. I'm here to observe. You have fun. I'm not going to judge you.
The observer effect.
Yes.
Okay.
I said, I'm just here to watch. You guys have fun.
The Columbo effect.
Right. Exactly. So they start talking, and it comes slowly at first. And then all of a sudden you hear this whole system is such crap.
Hello, and you are listening to Bill Murphy's Red Zone podcast. If you are listening for the first time, I interview leaders who inspire me in the areas of hardcore IT security, IT business leadership, innovation, creativity, entrepreneurship, and fearless living principles. Welcome to the show. Hello, I'm Bill Murphy, your host of the Red Zone podcast. I hope that you liked that introduction with Stephanie Nelson, who's the CIO of Seacret, who I will introduce to you in a moment. One of the things that I've been working on diligently, I thought I'd just give you just a little story here, is obstacle course racing. Now, I joined this group of obstacle course racers about 2 years ago, but I just wanted to do the training. I thought it was kind of fun to meet every Tuesday morning and do this OCR, they call it, obstacle course race training. And I had just gotten off a water ski shoulder injury, another injury to my other shoulder skiing. And I thought I had my fix with Ironman triathlons about 7 years ago. So I thought, I'll just do the training. I don't need to do any racing. Well, I finally got pushed into doing a race like a month ago, maybe 6 weeks ago at the Savage. It was called a Savage obstacle course race. And I just have to say that, well, I did get in the top 1% of finishers of 3,000. So that was kind of fun. But that being separate, I really enjoyed this thing called they have this cold pool that you're in the middle of this race. It's hot and you're running, and then they have this cold plunge that you have to go through. And they have this machine set up, this like 16-wheeler trailer that just keeps feeding this pool full of ice. And it was just great to just jump into this ice bath pool and people screaming and yelling. I just was in such relief. So anyway, there's another race called Spartan that is probably a little better known, but Savage does an awesome job. So if you're looking at adding something to your repertoire, want to do something interesting and fun and healthy, look into obstacle course racing. It might be something you might want to consider. The other thing that came up to me recently is that I'm involved in this program called Strategic Coach, and it's been around for a long, long time. Dan Sullivan is the founder. And so I go to Philadelphia every 3 months and have been doing this for 2 years. And they have different themes and concepts they cover for entrepreneurs every 3 months. And one of them this past time was actually, it was a while ago, but it popped in my head again. It was called The Gap. And many of us fall into what's called the gap. And the gap is what I learned is a measurement that many of the high performers that I work with and surround myself with, they're constantly comparing themselves to the horizon, of which by definition, you never get to horizon because the horizon constantly is moving as you move towards it. So this vision, we're constantly managing or measuring our success against a target, which is by definition a vision, unachievable. And what they taught us was a simple flip where when you're running towards a goal is to look backwards when you measure yourself and look back upon the mark of where you just came from. So you're constantly measuring yourself against a progress point that you can see and measure from. And it's much healthier for yourself and much better for your team from an encouragement point of view to be measuring against where you come from as a first default for your brain and communication versus always looking in the future in the vision, which is really tough to quantify and really tough to hit. So anyway, those are my 2 points for today. But let's get into my guest for today. And it's the global CIO of Seacret, Stephanie Nelson. And if you are a young CIO or a CIO that doesn't want your clock cleaned by young talent and you want to learn and listen to what the newbies are saying, Stephanie is working with a rapidly growing company, as I mentioned, Seacret, as a CIO and is executing as a high performance CIO, and she's young. And Stephanie and I discuss how she's able to achieve so much young, and we get into a lot of details about this, and we get into how she uses self-learning as an important tool for her, and how she learned through a mentor how to whiteboard her ideas and how that's built massive momentum and velocity into her ability to convey complexity into simple, actionable steps for people around her. And the best lesson she learned about how to convey technical information to the business and to business people, and lessons she's learned about how to effectively deal with the C-suite as a young high performer, and the importance of being able to answer the question of why for the C-suite. And then how she uses questions in her meetings. And we get into like examples and not just saying that she uses questions, but what type of questions does she ask? And how does she find mentors and which mentors have meant the most to her on her journey and how she finds them? And also the innovation mindset and how to manage big egos. This is an interesting skill she's developed she uses to solve problems is managing egos. And she's surrounded mostly by men. I think everybody would agree with that. So I think that is a skill she's really mastered. And how to partner with the business analyst to get things done. And if you are interested in marketing, there is a blend of CIOs and CMOs and skill sets of data and digital transformation, understanding the marketing and understanding, she really understands predictive behavior, analytics, content marketing, target marketing, and influencer marketing. And if you want to learn more about this, our conversation gets into the specifics. We also talk about different tools she uses for marketing analytics, like Quantcast and heat mapping tools, and even talk a little bit about VR and how she sees VR rolling out online. So that brings us to where I'd like to introduce you to Stephanie, and I hope you enjoy my wonderful conversation with Stephanie Nelson. So, Stephanie, I want to welcome you to the show today.
All right, thank you.
So, we got to start off with this. So, how have you been able to achieve so much so young? As the CIO of this worldwide company, how did it happen? Like, did you always envision yourself doing what you're doing?
I don't think so. I started out, I was just a kid. My dad is an engineer. He's invented all sorts of crazy things. And so I kind of came by the whole engineering, electronics, computer things honest, if you want to put it that way. But I started teaching myself how to do programming and website design and just kind of moved on from there. I learned some more in high school. I had a teacher who taught me some different pieces. And I wound up going to a different school and wound up teaching the class a couple of times on different web design principles. So that
you ended up teaching the class?
Yeah, I wound up taking over the class a couple of times.
In high school or in college?
High school.
Oh, wow.
Mm-hmm. So, yeah, that was senior year. And so then from there, I kept learning different pieces. There's a lot of online tutorials. There's a lot of videos and things of that nature. And so I would take on a project because somebody would call me and say, hey, I know you're really good at learning this stuff. Can you do this? And I go, sure. So I would learn on the fly as I'm doing a project and I gain the experience from all of that. So I wound up taking on a bunch of projects. And of course, I was working for AT&T as one of their sales reps, so making commissions. And I landed my first real job after I had gotten a portfolio built up, doing website design and development for several different radio stations. They were all under the same umbrella. And that was my first real gig.
Really?
Yes.
So you went to high school. I imagine that college, you probably were more advanced than most of the people in college.
I was actually trying to go to school to become a doctor.
Oh, really?
A surgeon, yeah. I wanted to be a surgeon. For a couple of different reasons, I couldn't do it.
Okay.
The money ran out, basically. And so I fell back on what I knew, which is all of this programming and engineering and that kind of thing.
Oh, interesting. So you were self-taught,
Yeah.
self-learned, and then you went out and found the radio station, had a portfolio, and just helped them build websites.
Yeah, so they had several different radio stations, both in Ohio and Michigan. And so I would do the websites, the front-end design for them, and do different pieces for them, update their content, all kinds of different portions, and learn, of course, as I went. And so then my next job, actually somebody called me and said, hey, do you want to come do this job? And the next thing I knew, I went from being a front-end developer to all of a sudden I was managing the entire department.
Oh my gosh.
Providing policies and procedures and how we should program and how to make everything work better together and working with the programmers on that side and the designers and the front-end developers. And yeah, so...
So being self-taught, were you ever nervous about having to learn 100% your own? Or is that something or did you ever have a mentor to help guide you along the way?
I had several mentors along the way. I mean, I'm always learning something. Even to this day, I'm still learning. So I have amazing developers who will still teach me things. And we tease each other all the time that they're schooling me or I'm schooling them or whatever you want to look at it. But the general idea is that they're always... He stole your mic.
Oh, and that's nice. We have a little guest here. We have Milo, what kind of cat is it?
He's a Himalayan.
Himalayan, playing with the sound my puffball. That's okay. I never use this one. He can play with it.
Okay. So basically, it's one of those pieces where I've learned so many different aspects from so many different people. I've learned everything from project management, how to think completely differently, because being self-taught and being a nerd, basically, it means that you get into a public situation and all of a sudden you can't talk to anybody about anything because you're speaking so much geek or Greek or however you want to put it that nobody understands what in the heck you're saying. So it took me a long time, and I had several people really work with me to be able to eloquently put my non-nerdy ideas into a format that everybody understood.
So what did they teach you?
It was whiteboarding, honestly. I had a really good mentor who sat me down one day and said, Stephanie, you're absolutely brilliant. You know what you're talking about, but I can't understand a word that comes out of your mouth.
Really?
Yeah. He was brutally honest, and it really helped. It really made a big difference. So he said, I'm going to try explaining this to me again like I was 5.
Okay, that's a good one.
And it really did help. It made a huge difference. And I wound up getting frustrated during that conversation. And I understood where he was coming from. But it was one of those situations where I was like, why don't you understand it? And it finally clicked that day that he doesn't understand all of the technology terms and he doesn't understand the implications behind them. So he worked with me and I started drawing it out on the whiteboard in 5-year-old language. And he goes, the phrase that I remember, and it always stuck with me, is you're teaching string theory to a 4-year-old.
String theory to a 4-year-old.
Yes.
I love that.
So that was how I started approaching things. And I even tell architects and developers that when they ask for advice on how to have meetings, you're teaching string theory to a 4-year-old.
Interesting. That's really powerful. So did he teach you how to use images or teach you how to use...
It was basic concepts. So for servers and databases, I would draw out a picture. And I started to explain databases, basically Excel tables. And so in spreadsheets, and you're combining those spreadsheets together and you're making pivot tables because as a project manager, he understood those terms.
Okay.
And so databases are obviously more complex than that, but he understood the basics and how it integrates into the front end of the site. And so how all of that functions together. And so I would draw it out on the board for him with arrows and walk him through the process and say, here's your problem here with a big red arrow. And this is why it's not talking to this server here.
Okay. So you're building out essentially almost a matrix of system interdependencies and dependencies.
Yes.
Okay. Interesting. And then the person was able to connect the dots.
Yes.
Of where something's broken without a 4-page research paper.
Exactly. And then he could also say, well, what happens if we try to do this? And it was legitimate. Then we could have a legitimate conversation because he had experience in other areas that I didn't. And so he could say, well, can't we circumvent this whole piece and why not just do this and move on from there? And yes, he was correct in some cases and in other cases he wasn't, but at least it allowed him to have an understanding and a legitimate conversation at that point.
He could actually engage and participate in that.
Yes.
I used to call those John Madden diagrams.
Yes.
I used to, early on when we were trying to talk about security, it's so complex with so many moving parts that everybody remembers the old days when the football diagram's on the board and they're trying to use the X.
Right.
The X goes around this and goes around. And it's like, this is the John Madden. Okay, I got it.
It's the same basic concept, except for I like to use multiple colors because it just makes it more entertaining.
The Picasso effect.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, that's really, really, really cool. Is there any other mentors that were, so that allowed you to speak to the team for sure.
Right.
To project managers.
Yes.
And what about to your peers or the C-suite?
So to most of my peers, talking geek is pretty simple because it already comes naturally. The biggest piece is it gets interesting because sometimes people are not always on your level. Sometimes they're higher than you. Sometimes they're lower than you. It just depends. Okay. And being able to talk to all of them, sometimes you do have to go down to a different level and just say, okay, let's draw this out on the board and make sure that everybody understands and we're all on the same page. So that one has always been relatively easy for me.
Okay.
The harder portion has been the C-suite. So as I moved up in jobs and as I went into new environments, explaining very technical concepts to non-technical people became more of a challenge. So I started, and again, I went back to a couple of different people that I had worked with before, and I said, okay, this is my problem. How do I explain this to them so they understand?
Okay.
And so again, they gave me some pointers, and I have several people that I still talk to on a regular basis about all of these kinds of things. And it's interesting because one of them I actually work with now, and she has been fantastic for breaking down very technical concepts into very easy to understand language. She's a translator, as she calls herself. And so she's been amazing on helping me break everything down for the C-suite. And most of it does revolve around drawing on the whiteboard, printing out images. So you have your website and drawing a house to show that's your homepage. Something simple concept she goes back to cars a lot of the time, explaining how a car functions. Well, you have to have the engine and you have to have the wheels. And if it doesn't turn over, then what happens?
So using metaphor.
Correct.
This mentor, is there any specific breakthroughs you had? Is there a specific situation that happened that you were completely amazed by, or it was a shot in the dark, or you had an intuitive moment that you're standing up on the board and you're like, gosh, I'm not getting through to this person, and all of a sudden, boom, you write it up there and it made a big deal?
There's a few of those times. It's been on both sides, actually. It's been with new development teams when I come into a new environment and I work with new architects and new developers that I've never worked with before. And it's also on the executive level. So explaining to them, because some of them are extremely technical and they've just been out of the industry for 10 years or 15 years.
Okay.
And so going back to what they know versus what current technology is can sometimes be difficult. So I would sit down and I would explain to them, and it wound up being the same thing, going back to the whiteboard and saying, okay, these are your current systems. This is currently how it operates. Here's how the data flows. Here's the direction. And then I would say, okay, but what happens when this happens? And what happens when this happens? Or if something else comes into the mix, and I'll go back to the car metaphor, what happens if you get a flat tire, or what happens if you don't have a spare, or what happens if everything suddenly goes down? What is your failover? What is your backup?
Okay. And so you basically are drawing all the complexity on the board. And the links, but then you can then point to different pieces.
Correct.
And draw almost like what if situations.
And it's more of asking pointed questions. It's not really saying this is where the architecture is bad. It's more of asking pointed questions of saying, okay, what happens in this scenario? How do we handle this scenario? Because ultimately, at the end of the day, my job is not to solve every single problem. My job is to ask very pointed questions and make sure that everybody in the room is coming up with an answer together, regardless of what level they're at.
How about if you're someone like yourself who probably already knows the answer, and you're in a group of folks that are your team? How do you restrain yourself?
So those are the most fun. Those are honestly the most fun conversations. I will usually pull a brand new team into a room, into a conference room. And so it usually takes me about a week to understand the general architecture and the systems and how they integrate and where the data goes and everything else. So I'll start out and I'll draw out my diagram for whatever project it is with all of the servers out on the board and using multicolors. And then I will sit down and I'll go, okay, guys, is this how this works? And sometimes they'll get up and they'll say, no, this one goes over here. This one goes over there. The data doesn't flow that way, blah, blah, blah. Fine, no big deal. I don't expect it to be 100% perfect. That's not the object of the exercise. So then from there, I'll say, okay, let's say you're starting brand new. Today is your first day. You've never met me. I've never met you. What would you do in this scenario if you walked into this? Is this how you would have architected things? If you had your druthers and you could do anything you wanted to, how would you have architected this? And usually there's a silence for about 4 or 5 minutes while they sit there and look at me like, is she serious? Does she really know what she's doing? And I said, really, guys, go for it, because it's mostly guys. So I said, go for it. I'm just here. You do your thing. I'm here to observe. You have fun. I'm not going to judge you.
The observer effect.
Yes.
Okay.
I said, I'm just here to watch. You guys have fun.
The Columbo effect.
Right. Exactly. So they start talking, and it comes slowly at first, and then all of a sudden you hear this whole system is such crap.
Oh my God, she's actually giving us an opening to actually redesign this?
And holy cow, I hate this about the architecture. And why would anybody do this? This is so stupid. And when you get to that point, you're good, because now all of a sudden you can start to see where their skill sets lie and how they're thinking and why they're thinking that way and what their experience is telling them about the current architecture. And it's a bit of a venting session, but it's also one of those situations where you can learn so much about them.
What's interesting about that is that you're in that process really uncovering skills.
Yes.
And thinking how they think.
It's mostly a change of mindset, because a lot of developers they get very comfortable. And regardless of the management, they get very comfortable in their position. They get very comfortable in their little hole or their little whatever you want to call it. And they wind up only programming in their little area, and they know their area very, very well. But then comes the whole hit by a bus, wins the lottery, whatever. And the inevitable happens where nobody else knows what is going on in that area.
Okay.
And so this becomes a major piece, because now all of a sudden you're changing the mindset from saying, I'm going to stay in my little corner and I'm going to program my happiness in my little corner, to all of a sudden you're saying, okay, let's kind of get out of your corner and see what else is out there. And you know your little corner and he knows his little corner. And let's put those ideas together and see if you guys are both doing the exact same thing and just don't realize it.
Interesting. I see how you do. So you know the architecture going in for the most part.
Yes.
So you're essentially using the exercise to flush out additional details that you might not have found yourself, but then also your team. You're really looking for the team engagement and seeing what levels.
That's correct.
And flushing out those little siloed efforts in fostering the team without actually, okay, that's really, interesting.
I'm not actually doing anything. I'm literally there to observe, to get them to work together as a team, to change that mentality from I'm all by myself and I'm going to single-handedly do everything myself to, hey, let's talk about this. Let's see what we're doing. And at the end of the day, it's really, it turns into managed chaos is really what it is. Because I go into this with my own expectations and I go into this saying, okay, I know that the architecture shouldn't be this way, or I know that this project shouldn't be run this way. Here's my opinions. And so along the way, when there's lulls or when it starts getting really off topic or when the venting goes a little too far, I ask probing questions and I say, okay, what happens if this were to come into the mix? Or what about if we did something like this? This is an example that I used over at another company. Why not do something like this? And you kind of manage the conversation along the way where ultimately 99.9% of the time, they're going to come back to what you're saying and they're going to agree with everything that you say. It's just allowing them to get there on their own.
Interesting. You seem very confident in the unknown or moving through the unknown.
It's fun. It's a lot of fun. You have some really brilliant people, and to sit here and pretend like I know everything is not going to win any friends.
Sure.
But the ultimate point is whether or not I'm right or not, I still won, because everybody in the room is going to be agreeing on whatever the final piece is. And so they're all going to ultimately work together harder and much better and much smarter than they were working alone.
Interesting. How do you foster an innovation mindset within your teams? What I mean by that is willingness to fail.
That is a difficult one.
That's okay.
Because a lot of people in the IT industry as a general whole have very big egos. All of us. Because we're all the smartest person in the room and we all know more than everybody else. Ask anyone in IT. We are always the smartest one. And yes, and it's all downhill from there. But
I love it.
It's unfortunately the truth. But working around those egos is the hardest piece because failure to them is not an option. Failure means quitting.
Oh,
and so for most developers, let's say you entirely change the programming language and the direction of the company, all of a sudden you're going to have a bunch of programmers who are extremely upset. B, they've been taken now not only out of their little corner, but now they're also being forced to change programming languages and technologies and everything else. And C, you're hurting their ego because now they're having to learn something and they will fail.
Okay.
And so it's a very difficult process to be able to either train them or build them up or let them go. It's one of the three is going to happen. Mm-hmm. So working with them and explaining to them, I expect you to fail. Okay. That is one of the biggest things because they look at you kind of funny, like, what did you just say to me?
You just took the F word and basically took it out as being a point of concern.
Correct. And so ultimately the entire piece is explaining to them that, okay, yes, this is a massive project. It's huge. Your core pieces are here, though. Those are already completed. Or maybe we're working on those core pieces. But you're only doing small little bits. And if this little bit fails over here, it's not a huge deal.
Okay.
And you're just going to put in your bit of code. We're going to test it. If it fails, okay. No big deal. We'll find another way.
Interesting.
And so it's that fear that they're failing and they're going to upset you and they're going to lose their jobs. It becomes one of those things where you get them to talk to you or you get them to talk to one of your managers who then tells you that it really makes a difference. And also the team mentality makes a huge difference because if they're talking to their managers, if they're talking to the other guys that they're programming with or girls, and they're saying, hey, I can't get this to work. hey, have you guys figured out a solution for this? It builds that mentality and it helps them to work together as a team, and it helps them to become a stronger team ultimately in the end, because they'll wind up working on the whiteboard and hashing out issues together, which means you're going to get a much better solution than you could have ever thought of on your own. And they're going to be wind up working together to come up with one solution that can probably be reused across multiple different projects.
What do you think the role of a business analyst is in the mix?
Asking very good pointed questions.
Do you end up training them as well?
Yes.
Yes.
To a certain extent, yes.
Okay.
Most business analysts, they will ask questions that I forget about, but they will ask a number of questions and very pointed ones, and they tend to know the business better. So, and that's a whole nother piece, but essentially what I always tell everybody in the IT department is you need to understand how the business works and why it works. Whether it's government and you're building financial data, or it's some small company that you're working with, you need to understand what their business model is, how they make money, and what you can do to improve it. Because ultimately, at the end of the day, we're all replaceable. We really are. But if you can create something, if you can continue to innovate, if you can go home, because all of us in IT, we go home at night, we read articles and we program and we do all kinds of crazy things, play video games. But what at the end of the day, they're going to go home and they're going to wind up thinking about it, because that's what we all do. And so when they wind up seeing other things that other people are doing or read other articles, if they can come back and say, hey, look, this is really cool, and this really made a huge difference, and they're in the same industry that we are, we should totally do something like this, except we could do it this way. You wind up being able to present to the business instead of the business coming to you, which gives you a totally different point of view on IT.
So is that one of the pieces you try to really foster? Because that's not offensive. That's playing offense.
Correct. It's changing the way IT is the mentality around IT.
Yeah, right.
Because most of the time IT is viewed as, hey, you're here, but we don't really notice you unless something breaks.
We're going to toss something over the fence to you.
Good luck.
Hope you can catch it.
Right. Why isn't that done yet?
So you're partnering with a business analyst, but you're actually trying to bring things to the table.
Correct.
To almost, not necessarily supersede, but you want to be the bird dog for the business.
Absolutely, because you don't want, here we go with the ego thing again. You don't want them coming to you and going, hey, look, I saw this new shiny thing. Look at how cool this is.
Sure.
And you're going, what the heck is that? Because then your ego.
But let's talk about that, because you and I were talking prior about, and this is part of the innovation lunch that you're part of as well. What is the role of the web for the business? Maybe just talk a little bit about the business that you're involved in right now.
So the business that I am in right now, they're a global company. We are in 7 different countries right now, and we're opening up 2 more countries in the next 2 years.
Okay.
Or actually next year, I'm sorry. So it's a growing company. It's a growing industry. They're doing very well. And it's keeping up with what they have and innovating all at the same time. It's a lot of fun. It really is. They've basically given me free rein to do what I need to do. And then I go back and I explain very technical things to them. And it's a lot of fun. It really is. They're great. They're absolutely wonderful.
So do you have a chief marketing officer?
No, not right now. We don't.
Okay.
We do have a marketing department. I have been working with them on a couple of different things, like you mentioned, Facebook. So we're trying to change the marketing strategy, because the company that I'm with, they offer everything from lotions to body butters to hair care to all these different types of products. And so one of the interesting pieces is getting that social media has changed. And marketing has changed. And so explaining to them, because if you know the technical side of how things work and why things work, you can immediately start to get into the social media side of things and explain how the website should work and why it should work this way and how to drive traffic. So I'll tell you a story because it's ridiculous. So to explain some of how the social engineering and all of this works, I was at a company, and this was a couple years ago, and we were working on I don't remember what it was, but we were messing with this one guy, and we were using Gmail at the time. And Google obviously ties into everything. So their API goes throughout Facebook and YouTube and Amazon and everything else. It all integrates ultimately. And so we started sending him emails with the very bottom of the email in all white, all caps text, the word spoon over and over and over. and he didn't see it because it's in all white at the bottom of his email. So, of course, he never saw this. And so all of a sudden, about a few days later, and all of us were doing it. So, and he's getting all these emails, and they're very long because you paragraph down all the way to the bottom of the page. And so all of a sudden, all these Amazon ads started popping up for spoons. His Google search was showing spoons. Everywhere that he looked was showing, I mean, Facebook was showing spoon ads. YouTube was showing spoons. And he comes into work and he goes, Stephanie, you're the technical person. What in the hell is going on? And I couldn't keep a straight face. And I finally had to show him what we had done.
Oh my God.
And he was like, that worked. And
You're tricking the algorithm.
Yeah. So now all of it, everything, everywhere he went had spoons. It was a good 3 weeks before he could get rid of them.
Oh my gosh.
So it's a good example to show you how much the website's interface and how much your email is affected and how much you search is affected by everything that you do. Everything is integrated now. And so even if you're going on your phone, you'll notice that your browser history is on your computer. And the same thing happens if you're on Facebook on your phone, it'll be somewhere else if you log into your computer. Everything is integrated now. So all of your advertising is very direct to you. So, and that's the whole AI type of side of things, where it starts to get predictive marketing. And so that's one of the pieces that I've been working with our marketing department on, is how to predict what another person is going to want to purchase based on their browsing history, based on the sites that they visited, and what types of information can we show them based on their browsing history. So, for example, all the products at the company that I work with are from the Dead Sea. They're all natural. They're great products. But how do I get that to somebody who may be searching for non-GMO related foods, or someone who's looking for hair care products that don't have all the extra chemicals in them? So there's so many different options to be able to set all of this up. And that's ultimately where I think all of us are going. And that's really going to affect our marketing and our industries and everything else.
Are you actively working with them to target advertising to local regions, into local regions of the country? And
So we do everything from getting analytics on our websites to see where people are coming from, what the IP addresses are, which countries they're coming from, which is standard, to finding out salary range, age range, how many children they have, what types of music they're into.
Okay.
All of that kind of information is extremely usable, and it can help you. Okay, so for example, most of our market in Korea is obviously Asian, female between ages 30 to 40, usually has 2 children, and they make around $50,000 in salary a year. What does that tell you? Okay, that means that they're probably a stay-at-home mom. They don't work, so they're interested in their appearance. And so our body butter cream would be great for a person like that, as an example.
Sure.
So there's just so many different items and so many different ways that you can take this information and actually do a direct marketing approach to them.
Yeah, I think this is we can use the magic site, google.com, and you can learn pretty quickly, spend 10 hours and just learn. I mean, there is I personally believe Facebook is going to be the new television. I think you got Twitter, ABC, Facebook, NBC, Snapchat's going to be CBS, and that we learned to dominate Facebook. I mean, there is so much video content, and it can be really right in your news stream. It doesn't even look like advertising anymore. It's buried right in there.
They've completely changed their advertising model, which is good and bad all at the same time. So most of the advertisements now are similar to Facebook, where it used to be a few years ago, you would have a 300 by 250 ad, and you would have to read around the actual advertisement. And because we started out with a third column or a first column of advertisements, and everyone started having pop-up blockers and advertisement blockers, and you naturally can train yourself to not even look at that third column. So that's when the gamification started coming in, and people would play games and you would get free money or free product or whatever. And then ultimately they switched to this 300 by 250 where you had to read around it, or put in a row where you had to read around the actual advertisement. And now what they're doing is they're actually changing it so it looks like legitimate content. And it is.
Yeah, absolutely.
It actually is legitimate content. So industries are spending so much money to find legitimate content. So again, I'll go back to just what I'm working on now, which is our products. So finding out where the Dead Sea minerals come from, why are they so important? How do they affect your body? All of the good results from that. everything like that could be considered legitimate content because it is. And posting a couple of photos, easily I can put it into my news feed, which will go back to my history, my browsing history, and that will give people, you'll get a much better, you already have a warm sale right there because they're already searching for those kinds of items. And then you're going and you're presenting actual content and actual information. And so you're going to get much better results.
Absolutely. Because you're respecting their attention.
Correct.
If you actually give them something useful and that they can take advantage of and put it very conveniently for them. I find this huge because I think the CIO has to realize that it is so hard to get a lead in business.
Yes.
It is so hard. Once you have, that's the hardest part for sales reps. That's why so many fail is they can't get a lead. So if you can put a gasoline on the fire of finding leads, then the relationship building can build after that. It's almost like IT has, it's like we're in the winner's circle to actually help sales.
Yes.
And sometimes the companies don't have a top-notch CMO to do this.
That's correct. And most of it is turning into IT and internet now. I mean, for example, okay, you have analytics on how many times somebody comes to visit your site before they purchase. The average was 6 to 7 times before somebody would actually purchase your product on your website. It's gone down considerably. But that still means that people are not immediately purchasing products. So that means that we're now all required to give better content, better information, show them why. Value added. What is the value to me? Why am I going to purchase this and why would I use it? And reviews have been another major piece that have come onto the market. So people are actually starting to spam Amazon, for example, with fake reviews in order to be able to up their Amazon purchase. And their rankings. So it becomes a very fine line of, do we spoof the rankings and reviews, or do we offer legitimate content? And it's a bit of both, to be honest. It really is. It's a bit of both.
Interesting.
But if you have a legitimately good product and you put legitimately good content out there and you explain to people why it's good, and you can put all of these different analytical pieces in, you wind up doing much better. And you can have those sales and you can have that ROI. And you can even see, okay, so let's say we're going to set up 2 different landing pages or 16 different landing pages with different layouts and different content in it. You can see how they perform based on the actual content itself.
And I love it too, because now you can take actual email addresses of valid, it's super interesting. Like you can have, let's say 1,000 of your buyers in a specific targeted market. And all you have is their email address. You can suck that into Facebook. And these are people that would be your normal, natural buyers that would want to see this content. And all of a sudden you put good material in front of them that they can respect and see the value of. I think that's a huge value that a CIO could walk into the marketing department tomorrow and be like, hey, you can do this.
Absolutely. It's massive. There's so many different ways to be able to provide targeted marketing. There's so many different ways to be able to provide content to people. It's amazing the number of analytics and pieces that you can get out there. Another good example is for example, on your website, if you want to see where people are clicking, there's all kinds of platforms out there that you can actually show heat maps of where most people are clicking, where they're reading, because most people will hover over content as they read it. And so if you get a heat map of your site and you can show where they're hovering and what they're reading, most people are not going to read entire paragraphs of data. But they will read bullet points and they will hover over those bullet points to read them. So what does that allow you to do? It allows you to target the specific words or content that you want your market to have. It allows you to show them specific images and different pieces that would relate to them. And of course, using different analytics and numbers that you have, you can say, okay, this person's browsing history is they looked for non-GMO products. We can show them that ours is a non-GMO as the very first bullet point. All of this is completely interchangeable based upon where the person comes from.
So what are some of the tools that you recommend?
Okay, so right now we mostly use Google Analytics, and we have a program called Quantcast. That will show you salary ranges. It'll show you all kinds of different information, everything from gender to children to favorite music, TV shows, everything.
Quantcast?
Yes. Okay. Quantcast. And then there's another one called Crazy Egg.
Crazy Egg, sure.
Crazy Egg is a heat mapping tool. And of course, there's a bunch of other ones as well that are great.
Does that Neil Patel make that one? Crazy Egg? Is he the founder of
I have no idea of that one.
So that's the heat map piece where you can actually see where people are going and then develop keywords based on that.
Correct.
That's really neat. That was really neat. Yeah, I think this is fantastic, and it's interesting to see you play into that marketing genre role, whatever you may call it, because I think it's a wide opening for CIOs to take advantage of.
It is, and it's a lot of fun because you're innovating and you're coming up with new ideas and you're saying, how can we grow the business? How can we make it better? What can we do? And social media has become such an outlet for some of this stuff. You can post everything from crazy, what is it? We did a smear campaign, SCHMEAR, where we showed a bunch of different products and we would smear it across a piece of paper and we would have people guess what the product was. And so it's just fun little events or fun little pieces like that. And we had so many people playing this game, and it's ridiculous because who has time to sit here and go, well, that's that product, but they do. They absolutely do. And it's all of these fun kind of silly pieces that are really honestly doing the deed for you. And if you have decent Facebook, if you have decent Twitter, if you have all of these other pieces, what winds up happening is other people sell your product for you. Mm-hmm. So we have people approaching us we have a mud mask that is magnetic. And so you put it on, and when it dries, you use a magnet to pull it off. It's really cool. But we have people who are bloggers and social media experts who are actually approaching us to take these products and show them on their websites and show them on their YouTube videos. And we're not selling it at that point. We're giving it to others to sell.
No, so is that Instagram influencers?
Oh, yeah. Instagram, YouTube. It's both.
You're actually finding influencers with an audience.
Correct.
And either paying them or somehow...
we're not even paying them.
Oh, really?
They approach us because they saw our social media and they tried out our product and they loved it.
Okay.
And so they are approaching us. We're not even having to do anything.
Interesting.
And so having those kinds of things, and obviously we could approach more and we want to approach more because this is free advertising essentially.
Right.
So, but yes, there's so many ways.
Even if you did pay $100, you got to look at $100 on Google AdWords versus $100 to someone with 1 million rabid followers.
Exactly. And all of those million are going to watch that video. That's a guaranteed piece versus where you're paying per click on Google advertising. There's no guarantee that somebody's going to buy your product or even view that.
So what message do you have for CIOs or people that are moving into the CIO ranks? What has been, you think, a lesson learned that you say, if you had to do it again, you would do it a little bit differently, or would you follow exactly the same?
I think everybody would do everything a little differently. I don't think I can say with absolute certainty that I would do everything exactly the same. I would not trade my experiences.
Okay.
I absolutely wouldn't. I've had a lot of good experiences. And one of the big things that I've come away with is it is my role, no matter where I'm at, to teach. Because in IT, we have so many complex pieces. We have so many areas that we touch. Everything from actual shipping out of warehouses to systems to managing computers and actual hardware. Marketing, we even touch that. I mean, there's so many different areas that we touch, and there is so much learning that we do. And teaching that to others, both above and below you, is extremely important. So, for example, I go into meetings with the C-suite and they come up to me and they say, hey, look, we found this really cool company and they're going to do this and this and this for us. And I go, yeah, no. And if I don't give them any explanation as to why or what is wrong with it or why we shouldn't move in that direction, they're going to come back in 6 months with another company that does the exact same thing and they're going to push it even harder. So the whole goal here is explaining to them why we're doing what we're doing, what the technology is behind it, why it's a good technology. And all of those pieces, it's our job to do that.
The teaching.
Yes.
The teaching piece. Okay.
Everything from the developers and architects and programmers below you to the C-suite above you. Because ultimately you can lead the developers and programmers and architects and everybody else below you to say, hey, why don't you guys research this? Don't take my word for it. Come back to me and tell me what you think is wrong, but do some research and come back. And they'll come back and they'll do that research. And they may disagree. They may agree with you. It just depends. But if you're able to have an intelligent conversation, they'll respect you. Yeah. The C-suite has a different view in that they want to understand the why. And that is the biggest piece. Yes, okay. The why. So why are we not going with this company? Why is it that we don't need their help? What are they offering?
Did you serendipitously bump into mentors? Did you go actively searching for them? And did you find them in books? I know you did people, but is there websites, books, and people? Or did you just kind of, as you needed the help, you just all of a sudden found the help?
So it's been in every job that I've had,
Okay.
to be honest. And I haven't actively gone looking for mentors. They kind of pop up as you need them.
Okay.
And so it's been one of those situations where I'll run into a problem, and usually somebody else at the office is having the same problem. And so you wind up talking about it with them. And I have learned, and I'm young enough, I have learned to draw on people both below and above me. And to be honest, some of the best people are those who are on the ground, who are in the weeds, who can see everything as it stands. And that has been the biggest piece of learning, because they can go, Stephanie, this doesn't make any sense, because how are you going to do this?
Oh, that's great. That's great. Well, I have really learned a ton, and I really appreciate you for the time we spent here today. Do you have anything that you'd like to end with as we wrap up?
I don't think so. I think most of it is just, I like to keep learning and keep going on. And there's so many interesting pieces. There's so many interesting things that are going on. We have so many new innovations in IT, and it's such an exciting place to be. It really is.
Do you think you're going to add AI or VR to your web, to your VR experience?
Absolutely. Yeah, that's really where I want to go. Experimenting with some of the artificial intelligence and experimenting with some of the VR. And yeah, I really think that would be a lot of fun.
What's the limitation on VR? Is it going to be the cycle, the capabilities on the client side of being able to process some of the...
It will, because most of our clients are using on their phones.
Okay.
And so some of it will be just fine, some of it won't.
Okay.
It depends. Most of what we would... Because most of us are reselling products, that's really what the business is. They would have different VR for different videos and different games and different events, and you can do so many different things. So you're reaching new areas, you're reaching new people that you couldn't have reached before because of the internet and because of these different pieces.
Well, this is great, very exciting, and I want to thank you for coming on the show.
No problem. Thanks for having me.
So there you have it. This wraps another episode of Bill Murphy's Red Zone podcast. To get all the relevant show notes, please go to our blog at www.redzonetech.net/podcast. Additionally, make sure you go to iTunes and leave your comments in iTunes about the show. This helps our show rankings enormously, and it helps support the show. Until next time, I appreciate you very much for listening. Thank you.